Greetings and welcome to the Remote Real Estate Investor. We have a really fun episode today. Michael and I are going to be interviewing the co-founders of all the different companies that make up the Roofstock ecosystem. So if you're not aware, over the past 6 to 12 months, Roofstock has acquired an asset management platform called Stessa, really cool software to manage all of your properties at an asset management layer, as well as a property management company called Great Jones. And altogether, it's a really powerful stack of real estate technology tools and operations for investors to have. And we brought on the founders from all of these different companies. So we have Gary Beasley from Roofstock, who is a co-founder. We have the two co-founders from Stessa in Heath Silverman and Jonah Schwartz. And we have two co-founders from Great Jones and Jay Goldkling, as well as Abigail Besden. And we asked them about their company, the fit within the Roofstock ecosystem, some pearls of wisdom on investing, on starting companies, all of that good stuff. So really excited about the episode we have today, and let's get into it.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your very, very, very busy schedules. We've got a lot of heavy hitters on the line here. So I would love if you could all introduce yourselves to our listeners one by one. Gary, if you want to kick things off, we'll start with you.
Sure. Great to be here. I'm Gary Beasley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Roofstock.
Fantastic. And Abigail?
Hi, I'm Abigail Besden, and I am a co-founder of Great Jones.
Perfect. Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay Goldkling, founder and CEO of Great Jones, now a Roofstock company.
And Heath?
Hey, I'm Heath Silverman, co-founder of Stessa.
And last but certainly not least, Jonah.
Yeah, I'm Jonah Schwartz, a co-founder of Stessa.
And we've got Tom Schneider on the line as well. So I would love if you all could share why Roofstock, Stessa, Great Jones decided to join forces. What was the impetus behind that?
When we first started Roofstock, we knew not only did we want to have a marketplace for transactions, but we wanted to build deeper relationships with owners and build a community. And to do that, we knew that we needed to be relevant to all property owners who own single family rentals, not just those who are looking to trade at any given time. And so from the very early days, we were trying to figure out how to do that. And I met Heath and Jonah, what was 2017?
2017.
Guys? Yeah, 2017. And we just hit it off right away. And I said, wow, these guys are building something really cool that it could provide software for every single family rental owner out there, kind of like a Credit Karma app for real estate owners. It'd be a great way to stitch together a community, get a lot of data, and invite people into the marketplace at the right time. So we had a marketplace and no community. They had this great community they were building through the software. And so I knew then it would be quite interesting to try to bring the companies together. Unfortunately, they decided to sell their company to JLL and not to us. JLL at the time was a little bit larger than Roofstock, still is. But we'll talk about it later. Life comes full circle. Very recently, we were able to buy the business from JLL and bring them into the Roofstock family. And so that's worked out really well. And then with Jay and Abigail, we also knew that we needed to have a relevant connectivity to retail owners and offer property management, because that's the biggest pain point for owners, is to be able to outsource a lot of those challenging tasks to professionals. And so we've been tracking Jay and Abigail and Great Jones for a long time. There was an opportunity this year to get together, get to know each other more recently. And that was sort of the one missing piece of our fully integrated platform was retail property management. We have institutional grade property management through StreetLane, which was the first company that we purchased a couple of years ago. And now with Great Jones and with Stessa, we've all kind of come into the ecosystem together, one big happy family under the Roofstock umbrella. And now we're in the process of integrating the businesses and growing. So let me turn it over to maybe Heath or Jonah. Maybe you go first, and then Jay and Abigail, you could chat about how this all has worked for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have anything additional to add other than I still remember those drinks we had back in 2017. where we got introduced, and it started sort of as a more casual conversation about what we were doing, and turned into a couple hours of just diving deep into both of our businesses. And I think it was just very refreshing and super exciting to meet somebody who had, the same big vision, of how do we bring transparency and accessibility to this asset class that traditionally was just one that, was hard for a lot of people to get into and just didn't have great technology to help power investors out there. So fantastic. It came full circle. We're super excited to be a part of Roofstock, and excited to see what we're going to do together.
Yeah, I think Heath and I, and also Gary and I, have talked about how similar some of the visions are that we've articulated. Maybe the starting points have been a little bit different because there's a lot to do. But sort of, I think each of us organically has heard from, the owners we work with, and to some extent the residents that we work with, how many different moments they'd like to, have our partnership or partnership of like-minded folks to think about using technology or operations to sort of, remove friction, let them focus on what they enjoy doing best. And I would say, really over the last 12 to 18 months, we've felt even more pull to help our customers, buy more assets, dispose of assets, make good decisions. And so, when there came an opportunity to come together, not just in a partnership, but more than that with Roofstock and also with the Stessa folks, it's been really exciting to get to work together, to take on the world, but with a shared vision.
Yeah, we hear that from a lot of our customers as well, that they're, what they get from Stessa is great, but they'd love for us to do more. They want sort of that one-stop shop, full stack solution to a lot of these problems, including transaction, including property management. So, fitting together and putting out one solution for our customer base, our shared customer base, makes a lot of sense.
I think what's so neat about these three companies is just solving, three very different problems, from transactions to ownership to asset management. I think a lot of times as a startup, you can have really big eyes and be like, oh, we want to do all of this, and it works really wonderfully when it's able to come together all together. I'd love to hear kind of the evolution that you guys had kind of originally. Was it always kind of to build out this full stack on your own, or was it, more niche? I'd love to hear just kind of the evolution of your thought of the strategy of the business and, how that unfolded into where we're at today, which I think is a really nice platform, I'll say.
I could take the Great Jones piece there, but it sounds like we're all describing a different starting point that very quickly led to this broader vision, because ultimately that's what we all learned pretty quickly the customer wanted, a no friction one-stop shop for the full puzzle. And on the Great Jones side, we started, we exclusively were serving what we call the retail customer, the mom and pop investor. And we had started to describe ourselves as institutional grade PM, institutional grade property management, which meant a whole host of things around the type of service that you deliver and what you actually do as the property manager. But it became clear that to really be institutional grade, you had to give the retail investor access to all the things that institutions have access to, which is really a full stack solution to investing. And so I think Jay can correct me, but I think within a matter of months of the business existing, had articulated that it's actually a platform vision, that property management is this wedge into this much larger space. And it took us quickly to realize that. And then it's a drum that we beat throughout the duration of the business, and continue to hear. And in talking to both Gary and Heath and Jonah, it feels like everybody had the same path. It was just a different, what is the wedge? But the thesis is the same.
Yeah, 100%. Our wedge, we always believed that financials were sort of the foundation of every real estate investor's business. So by starting with the financials, we could become the system of record. We have all this data around the performance of their properties, of their portfolio. And with that information, we can start providing, insights to help them maximize the value of their portfolio, automate a lot of the, by automating the financials, we can save them a lot of time, help them make more money. And doing so would basically get us into a place where we could then long-term become that platform. But of course, now that we have Roofstock and Great Jones, we've definitely accelerated that vision and are able to move a lot faster.
Yeah, another thing that we hear from Stessa users is that by using Stessa, it gives them the confidence to expand their portfolio. And obviously, Roofstock and the Roofstock marketplace is there when our customers are ready to expand.
Yeah, I think bringing these companies together was a really natural thing. And we could talk about why I think it's working. It's still early, but it's working quite well relative to, I think, a lot of business combinations. And I think what you're hearing is a lot of commonality of vision. And as Abigail, I think, aptly put, we all just started from a different place, but we were kind of going in the same direction. And so for us, I think it just has accelerated kind of the growth and the amount of time it would take, rather than having to build all of these things ourselves. By bringing them all together, we could just do it much more quickly. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. And then by getting the businesses together, then in addition to, it's not just a 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. There are synergies, and we should each be able to grow our businesses faster and more efficiently because we're sharing data, we're sharing talent across the organization. And there's a reason most mergers fail, and a lot of that is cultural. We have been very, careful as we evaluate any of the transactions that we've done. It's got to be the right cultural fit, and these clearly have been and are. And I think one of the reasons that we actually ended up doing both of these deals was the people. Probably the primary reason. They both had good tech and good businesses, but being able to attract all the talent, the energy, and the knowledge of the founding teams and their core leaders around them is really, really powerful. It's just hard to find that out in the market. So there's lots of reasons I think we're seeing early returns being very promising for this.
I think that we all started at different entry points, and not randomly, but because those entry points were our strengths. So I see Stessa as like having firsthand financial issues with their portfolios, like really understanding that space very well, coming at it from like a real software sophistication. Jay and I and the team that we've built both come from really heavy hitter operators, operationalizing messy businesses with technology. And then you had Roofstock with really deep real estate expertise, having done more at scale in the transaction space than probably any other team combined. So it's not that we all just had the shared vision and happened to be coming at it differently. You have these really deep strengths that we're all playing to. And when those come together, I think that's part of the 1 + 1 = 3 that Gary's referring to.
Perfect segue into the next question, Abigail. So we've been talking about this kind of platform of the different layers of asset management, property management, transactions. I'd love to hear the different founders talk about what is the special sauce within their layer of the transaction. Maybe technology-wise, you can explore the space of the question. But what would you say is some of the competitive advantages within that vertical of the company that you've started that has come together to form this platform? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what makes your segment that much better than other options out there.
On the Great Jones side, I think what we saw was, a number of different areas of inspiration. I think, as Abigail mentioned, a lot of our sort of founding team, and I think at the core of a lot of what we do is, how do you take hard kind of online, offline problems, maybe where there hasn't been a tremendous focus on sometimes efficiency or the customer experience, and build something better that's sort of enabled by technology and maybe enables higher growth and higher levels of quality. So what does that mean with respect to property management? I think the experience that investors have often had is that it can be run as a local service business, and as with many of those cases, there will be a really wide distribution where some people will be excellent, some teams won't be. There's not a tremendous amount of consistency facilitated by technology. It's heavily reliant on the people. And I think what we found, both in prior experiences and at Great Jones is I think the core of what we're doing is thinking about what are the outcomes we want to deliver at the end of the day that create, a great customer experience and really solid returns. How do we think about instrumenting processes that haven't been instrumented previously? And what that allows, and how do we build great, really nice interfaces for, our own team members, owners, residents, vendors, anyone who needs to engage to create that great outcome. And what we find that then leads to is a much more consistent and controllable level of performance, where our team has much more transparency into, how can we drive those returns, how can we drive that quality, and because we've instrumented things, and captured that data that maybe historically wasn't structured or captured, we can create much more visibility for an owner or a resident on the status of something. And so an example would be, doing a property turnover where it's sort of, if from move out to kind of rent ready, there's a bunch that needs to happen in terms of doing a full inspection, considering the different paths to remediate or improve anything, coordinating the work of many different vendors, managing timelines, managing costs, giving an owner the appropriate level of choice. And so we've built things like workflow tools for our own team, external interfaces, owner approvals flows, to really make that more of ultimately almost like an e-commerce and messaging experience for the owner. And that's what we think people have been accustomed to, in other experiences, and enables the owner maybe to Jonah's point, to feel more comfortable growing their portfolio, doing so across a number of markets because they know, the quality outcomes that can come with that. And so what we've done, that being one example, but I think we consider a lot of the core of what we've done to think about, how do we infuse maybe more consumer tech into a space that hasn't necessarily had that, to create a higher performing, maybe more digital, more consistent experience.
That's awesome. Transparency, control, all of that good stuff. I love it, Jay. Gary, do you want to speak next?
Sure. One thing that I neglected to talk about at the beginning, and I know you wanted us to talk a little bit about our real estate investing experience. And I guess what it brought to mind as I was sort of thinking about this, which I think is sort of relevant to what we're all doing, is I started really at very large scale on the institutional side, buying thousands and thousands of homes during the last financial crisis, and really kind of cut my teeth figuring out how to build institutional grade tools that would be used by institutions. And I think what we're doing here together now is taking a lot of those learnings that I and my co-founders, Gregor and Rich, kind of were deeply embedded in at institutional scale. And I don't want to say dumbing them down at all, because it sounds derogatory. Simplifying them and having a lot of that same power that we developed, for institutions, and putting it in the hands of retail investors, and which is, by the way, where 98% of the homes sit. So when we think about the addressable opportunity as a platform catering to real estate investors, it just gets me so excited that we can take all those learnings and apply them now through these different business models at real scale to retail investors, which, as well as institutional investors. And I think one of the other, learnings, or I would say observations that might be counterintuitive as people are out there thinking about building their own businesses and how it might relate, to what they're doing in their own lives. But we took a little bit of a different path to building Roofstock, where oftentimes people will say, you got to pick the retail segment or you got to pick the institutional segment, and then focus ruthlessly on that single customer and don't try to boil the ocean. Well, we did try to boil the ocean, in that we took a contrarian view and said, there's 90 million homes out there, about 17 million of them or so are rentals. But that rental home doesn't know whether it's an institutional home or a retail home. It's just a home. So we needed to understand the whole market. And by catering to both types of customers, we get data from all of them. And the market is the market. It could be an institutional buyer, retail buyer, could be any of that. So I guess I would just encourage people, as they're thinking about their own entrepreneurial journeys, and don't necessarily always listen to conventional wisdom, because we didn't. We came at it differently, perhaps more ambitious than we than might have been wise coming out of the gate, but we felt like it was the right strategy, and it's turned out to work. And so a lot of it comes down to execution and being able to prioritize and ruthlessly prioritize when you're trying to do a lot of ambitious things. You have to figure out which are the most important, and focus on them. And then also know when to pivot and when to stick to your strategy. That's just kind of another thing as for entrepreneurs out there. And that would be one of the things maybe that's interesting for everyone else on the call is that we've all had times where we've had to pivot our strategy. And that's one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur. You have to have conviction around what you're doing until you decide you need to do something differently. And I'd be curious if any of you, my colleagues here, had any observations around that. But that is something that as entrepreneurs and as real estate investors, you are always trying to figure out, well, shoot, do I need to change my strategy here, or do I need to stick to my stated goals?
We had something similar where at Great Jones, almost identical. We were serving the retail customer exclusively, and we had the opportunity to serve an institutional customer, which was so different and clearly frightening because you have your heart and vision set around a certain customer experience, but took the leap and did it. And we too ended up finding not just that it worked, but that it benefited both customer segments. So the wisdom of have a single customer segment, we too maybe walked away from, and both customer segments benefited in a way that I think paid off. The courage of that paid off. I had definitely received the advice early in my career, less about Great Jones and more in previous contexts, to get great at murdering my darlings, which I believe is a literary phrase around being willing to move away from a plot line if it's, not serving the momentum of the book or whatever piece that you're writing, and definitely sticks with me. It sounds ruthless, but I think it ultimately pays off, ends up being the bolder decision. And
you thought all that stuff that you learned when you were a writer was not going to be beneficial in your entrepreneurial career.
Exactly. Here I am.
I'll add with Stessa, we actually pivoted pretty early on. So the first customers that we targeted were really mid-market investors. So people with, 50 to 100 million in assets under management who we'd go after and provide full service bookkeeping to. And that's kind of how we got started, offering a great financial solution. But we quickly learned that the really massive market, as Gary was saying, is really this, retail investor out there. So shortly, I don't know, what was it, Jonah? It was like a year and a half after we started signing up customers, paying customers, we basically made a big decision. Hey, we're going to go after this much bigger market, much harder to reach. These are investors who are very hard to identify, often not willing to pay upfront. So with a free self-service product, and we had to go back and fire all of our existing paid customers, which was a very painful experience, but put us on really the right track to get to where we are today. And when we went after those retail investors, one of the things that we learned that was really interesting is that while technology and data is really, there's quite a bit out there. It's very pervasive out there today. Many of these investors were just not using anything. We found that most of them, they actually had no clue if they were making or losing money on any of their investments. They kept most of their financial data in a out-of-date static spreadsheet. And the only time that they knew if they'd made or lost that money or how their properties were performing was once a year when they got their returns from their accountant. So that was a pretty big insight. We realized that when we built Stessa and when we targeted these guys, we really needed to make this an incredibly intuitive, very much a consumer, grade offering for these guys. So we built this self-service tool, purpose-built for investors, built by investors, really based on our own pain points that Joan and I have had after being investors for a number of years together. And one of the wonderful things about that is, again, this was very, very painful decision to make this change. But nowadays, our biggest, one of our biggest areas of customer acquisition is just investors referring other investors. And when you go into our Net Promoter Score comments and see what people are writing. I actually did this the other week. I took all the words, created a word cloud, and the two biggest, most common words that people use when they describe, that our users use when they describe Stessa, is easy and love.
Great question and prompt, Gary. Michael, go ahead and feel free, guys, if you in moving the conversation in a certain direction you think they would be more engaging as we're going through. But this is really great so far. I love the inflection point question of these businesses. I think people are going to love it. Go ahead, Michael.
So you all individually have mentioned technology and how your companies have leveraged that. So I'm curious if you can give listeners at a high level what technology you're giving them access to so they can compete with some of the big players at the institutional level. Fundamentally,
when we think about what's different about Roofstock, it's the data and technology that's foundational to what we're doing. So you've got really the same data and information analytics at your disposal that the major institutional investors have through our platform. And so the whole idea is to make it simple and intuitive, not overly complex, have a nice UI, but very powerful data around valuation, underwriting, how to evaluate investments on a risk-adjusted basis with our neighborhood scores. So the idea would be if you're an experienced investor or even a novice investor, you can come and use our tools, and we provide. I don't want to say it's training wheels, but it kind of is, because it's all sort of teed up there with starting assumptions that you could then play with. You could look at other properties. You could participate in the Roofstock Academy and learn. You can join that community and share ideas and notes. So we try to provide this as a platform for investors to learn. And we have plenty of people who engage with us who never buy anything, but they're just learning about investing and how to get on their own journey, and that's fine. It's totally cool. We love it. But eventually, we're there in case they want to do it. So I think in terms of if you're not in this professionally, oftentimes it's just hard to understand how to value something or how to think about the trade-offs of buying a property in a 4-star neighborhood versus a 2-star neighborhood, and playing with a lot of that stuff. And that's what we're trying to do, is continually make the site and our business intuitive, not overly complex, but have enough power that people can unlock when they want to get in and do further and further research. I know when we were first raising money, we got some feedback from a venture capitalist. It turned out to be very good advice. The first version of our site was way too complicated. We sort of nerded out on a bunch of different calculators and all these kinds of things that, as kind of professional investors, were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this and that and that? And we did. And his feedback was, guys, this is a Frankenstein product. I get why everything is there. And it seems like it was kind of, you just kept adding things because they were cool. And that's exactly what we did. We didn't edit properly. And so that was a really good forcing function for us. He said, if you could ever clean this up, you'll have a monster company, but everyone's going to get lost in this. So we did, and we simplified it greatly, and we took a lot of that functionality and we buried it a little bit deeper into the site so you can unlock some of those analytics and things like that. But there's a real balance between having a powerful set of tools and a simple set of tools. And while people want choice, complexity can be, it could tie you up in knots. And so it's got to be this balance between, editing and providing curated data and choices for people versus, maybe say that, like, if you walked into a store and none of the products were organized into sections, it would be so overwhelming, right? But if you could get guided to the right part of the store and then you have 3 things to choose from, it's a heck of a lot easier. So that was, I think, another kind of interesting lesson as we were building. Just because you can do stuff doesn't mean you should. And in many cases, simpler is better.
Gary, one thing I've been meaning to hear you articulate a response to this question is, for some investors, there's a perception that Roofstock is more for like an intro investor. They buy a house on Roofstock and then they bought it. The training wheels are off, then they go buy somewhere else. What would you say to that comment of thinking of Roofstock as kind of like exclusively as like on the retail side, just for the training wheels, like the initial investor, and then you know, go somewhere else? I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on that stigma.
Sure. Well, I would say it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? We have some of the most sophisticated investors in the world buying homes off Roofstock, so it's not just for novice investors. But we do have a unique positioning in that there are very few on-ramps for investors to learn how to do it, and we provide that guide. And if someone buys a home in a particular market, and they want to buy more homes, I think there's no obligation to do it through Roofstock. You certainly can use those skills that you have developed, but it's certainly a heck of a lot easier because you've got all those tools already, and so there's no reason not to. It doesn't really cost you much to use our system. We charge a small marketplace fee to buyers, but you get all the data and analytics and all that to go there. So I would say if you want to buy remotely, it's very hard to do it on your own. So Roofstock has that infrastructure where we could pair you with property management, financing, all the comps and analytics. You certainly could go do it, but if you're looking at homes in 4, 5, 6 different markets on your own, it's very challenging. You have to travel, you have to find real estate brokers to work with. And so, I don't think, I guess I really don't think about our platform as catering certainly exclusively to first-time investors, although a lot of people do start with us. I think on average now we're just under 2 homes per investor. People who are using the site, and I think a lot of people are trying to buy a home a year through our platform. There's certainly no obligation to continue to use this, but I think for the most part, what we're seeing is people kind of continuing to use us and maybe using more and more of the tools over time as they do get more sophisticated. Maybe you do start to think about portfolio construction and think about where you want to own homes and set up little alerts, put yourself on a program to build a diversified approach. So I think it's a testament to the platform that we're building and the veracity of it, that it can be something that someone could start with and then stay with throughout the life cycle. And you could get as geeked out and as intense as you want about some of the tools and analytics, but you don't have to.
Yeah. And plus all the other additional layers within Stessa and Gray Jones. And Michael, if you want to just reiterate that question that Gary answered first related to technology, we can have Jay, Jonah, and Heath take a stab at it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So curious to know, because you all come from the technology background, what technologies and tools the individual investor has, Abigail, I think you said it nicely, the mom and pop investor has at their disposal because of the companies that you all have founded. So
I think Heath and I, came to this not because we were full-time real estate investors, right? Real estate was sort of like our side hustle while we were working in the tech industry. And, at our day jobs in the tech industry, you have access to workflow automation, KPI dashboards, like, sophisticated, modeling tools. And when we were working on our side hustle of owning a moderately sized real estate portfolio, we were doing spreadsheets and sending a lot of emails back and forth, and had a stack of paper documents on our desk. And so that was really the core problem that we were looking to solve, is give people those sort of professional tools, but make it simple and make it purpose built for real estate.
Yeah, I think taking on a bit more of the operational side of property management, but with a similar lens. A lot of our product strategy has been about, how do we build the internal tool set and structured data that helps us create the outcomes in a scalable way across, an increasing number of markets. So enabling, investors to work with us across a bunch of markets that then leads to that transparency for the owner. And I think, I talked a bit about how we've thought about turns in that context. I think that sort of measurement also allows us to then really lean in and maybe build some more custom tooling where we see there's going to be a benefit. So for example, when we were very focused on, once we had built a lot of the measurement of turn times, we saw there was an opportunity to get, our staff out to homes to inspect them faster. That led to us building a set of sort of prioritization and routing tools focused on that problem, that sort of prioritization of field work and completing that. And so, I think part of where that then goes, in addition to the outcomes for our investors, is a new layer of intelligence into that operational layer. So because we're measuring things like processes or costs, maybe ROI around things like maintenance or turns, or how did those decisions work out that we made around renewals or leasing? It's then our goal to think about how to structure those data sets maybe into the owner, web application, or help owners make their next decisions based on a sort of layer of ownership that they haven't had that transparency into historically.
So I've got just one last question for everybody, and very curious to see where it takes us. But I would love if you all can share a little pearl of wisdom or a nugget that you've picked up because you are founders and co-founders of tech companies that you find really applicable to real estate investors. What's a kind of an actionable takeaway or something that an investor can walk away from listening to the episode today from you all that have founded companies?
I already shared that you need to murder your darlings, so let that be a minimum pearl.
We should name the episode.
Yeah.
I think that's the name of the episode.
The website, the original Roofstock website was so complex, and he had to murder, maybe just bury some darlings. So I think we saw that the same lesson play out there. The main piece of advice I have is to not overreact to things that are on fire. So to sort of set that your baseline is that all things will be on fire, there will be multiple fires, and that you shouldn't over pivot or over course correct based on any one, imminent moment of pain, which I think takes a degree of articulation and commitment to where you're going and what the longer term path is. Lest that be taken too literally for a real estate investor. I don't mean to use fire, like if something's on fire, surely it's not the lesson to be learned there.
I was just going to say, do you know about the 2 fires that I've had in my building?
I don't.
Where were you 2 years ago to calm me down?
But whatever the appropriate corollary is, to be confident in whatever strategy you set and be committed to it and not over pivot based on, near-term troubles.
Yeah, I would second that in real estate, it can be tempting to try to optimize one particular transaction or renovation at the expense of like the long term. Thinking about your network, the business relationships of the team that you're using to build your real estate portfolio up, and obviously, building a startup is similar. You can't get there's the day-to-day aspect of it, but you also have to make sure you're always building for the long term.
Everything takes so much longer than you ever expected.
I would agree with that. I agree with all those pearls of wisdom. I think having the right long-term orientation, making decisions that are right for the long term, very critical, whether you're an entrepreneur starting a company or you're a real estate investor. How much do you want to invest in your renovation? It's going to cost you more, but then it's going to cost you less on an ongoing basis. When you're starting a company, how much do you want to invest up front in your core technology and in your team? You could do things more on the cheap, but it might not be as enduring. So I would think about investing, in capital and people, really, really critical. And then I would say, just on the entrepreneurial side, what has worked for me is real optimism. Because I think there's different ways, but you're intellectually honest, but you're optimistic and you're solution oriented. You can fall into despair very easily as an entrepreneur, or if you have a real estate investment that's going sideways. But if you really sort of say, okay, we are where we are, what are our options? How do we fix it? And I know we're going to get through this. You find very few entrepreneurs who don't have a glass is half full kind of orientation. A good friend of mine founded Workday. His name's Anil Boostry, and he also founded another company with Dave Duffield earlier in his career. And so Dave co-founded Workday with him as well. And Anil said one time, he said, "Yeah, I'm a glasses half full kind of person, and I'm a good compliment to Dave, my co-founder. By contrast, he's a glasses entirely full type person. So, it's not as glass half empty, glass half full. Anil thought he was, I'm pretty optimistic. And Dave was like, off the charts. This is going to work. And this is how, and it's worked. He's created multiple multi-billion dollar companies. But so I would say attitude is important, and perseverance. And I think by keeping that positive attitude, not everything's going to go right. You need to try lots of stuff and celebrate the failures, keep going. So we like to say at Roofstock, fail forward fast, try new things, celebrate those things. And it's not easy to celebrate failure. It sounds kind of silly, and it's kind of a West Coast thing, but we do try to do it and talk about things that don't work. Is eventually you're going to find some magic in there. And if people aren't comfortable failing, they don't take those chances. So I think, those are a few things that I would share.
I'm going to add one more, which is luck surface area. And as you were talking about optimism, it kind of reminded me of this. So at my wedding, Jonah actually gave the best man speech, and he spoke a bit about luck surface area and how it applies. And I would say both in real estate and in starting a startup, you really got to just put yourself out there, make it known where you want to be, go and scream from the rooftops. Hey, this is what I want to accomplish. This is what I want to do. Make sure everyone is knowing what you're trying to do. And hopefully the right people will kind of step up and help you get to that end goal.
I love that luck surface area. I think it was Ben Hogan who also said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So there's no substitute for that hard work element as well.
Jay, do you want to close us out? I haven't heard your pearl yet. Do you want to, you got the final pearl?
Sure. I mean, I think it goes back to something Gary said about investing in the team, where I think the quality of the team and I think relationships among the team are just such a huge lever in whether it's startups or really trying to be successful at anything. And so I think being patient around building the right team, having a high bar for the right team, and sort of who's your network that you rely on as you build a portfolio, as you build a company, I think has led to some of our greatest successes and some of our missteps occasionally. And so I think has always been something I've tried to keep in mind.
And I would say, one thing that I've also learned over time, and I firmly believe is the right strategy, whether you're building a company or a real estate portfolio, even though buying property is transactional, there's a way to live your life and build your career in a way that's more relationship oriented. And I think some of the most successful entrepreneurs, whether it's in tech or real estate, take the long view and don't view everything as transactional. And while you want to get a good deal on a property, you might be dealing with a serial seller. You deal with that person well, you're going to develop, in the long run, you're going to do much better by trying to find win-win outcomes. And so that I would put that out there, because I think oftentimes in real estate, people view things very much as a one-shot deal, very transactional, trying to maximize everything. And I think if you sort of take a step back a little bit sometimes and optimize for the long run, take a more relationship view can be smart.
We love to hear your feedback. So if you have any questions you want to ask some of these co-founders, be it about real estate, entrepreneurship, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, just write it into the comments. We watch that stuff all the time. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, if you could write this in the either Apple podcast comments, or you can just email us. You can email us at help@roofstock.com with questions, comments, anything you want related to this content that we're creating. And as always, happy investing.